I love operating systems. In fact, I'm a collector of operating systems. Would you like to see my collection? Well, you sure can. Take a look right here on my system. So for example, I'm a big fan of Ubuntu Linux. And if you look there, I've got all these different versions of Ubuntu, and some of them go way back. Over here, I've got copies of Windows 7 and 8 and 8.1. There's even a copy of Vista in there. And if you really want to see a mess, here's all my different versions of Windows 10. Now, if you look at these, they just look like files stored on a server someplace. But what you're really looking at are what are called ISO images. An ISO image is a perfect copy of what was originally optical media. So the idea was, back in the old days, and still today, I've got a Windows 10 on DVD right here, is that you bought an operating system or acquired an operating system by purchasing or acquiring optical media. Optical media has been installing operating systems since before 1995, so that gives you an idea how long this has been around. Now, when you install an operating system onto a hard drive, what you're actually doing is a lot more than simply copying some files onto the drive. Remember, the operating system has to be in the partition tables, and it has to pick up once the system BIOS has said you're good to go. So the actual process of installing an operating system is, well, yeah, there's a lot of copying, sure, and a lot of setting up, but it also puts itself in the position on your hard drive's partition table so it can begin to load once your system BIOS is done. So we do a lot of installing stuff. So the trick here is that we use ISO images everywhere to do everything. If I want to make a bootable optical media, I have to get an ISO, and then I have to go through a process called burning it to put it on there. Now, the only downside to optical media, I wouldn't say it's a downside, but because it's becoming more uncommon, we're starting to see stuff like this. So here's a copy of Windows 10 Home. Nope, it's not a CD-ROM. It's actually just a little tiny thumb drive, and that's what I use to install now. On this thumb drive is an ISO image of exactly what's on here. It's just that thumb drives have become more common, less people have optical media, so that can be an issue. If I want to make bootable media, I have to get an ISO from somewhere, and then I take that ISO and burn it onto these different types of media. So we burn onto optical media, but actually the term even fades now into things like USB thumb drives, or if you want to use an SD card, almost any kind of media like that. We still tend to use the word burn, although it really only makes sense for optical media. So a couple of things I want to show you here. First of all, if you take a look at these are ISOs. Number one, Windows recognizes these as disk image files, but it doesn't show something that I have to actually turn on so you can see it. And what I'm going to do is unhide extensions for known file types. Now watch what happens when I do this. Do you see the ISO? Any file that ends with ISO, and notice how big they are. These are big, big, big files. So, because they're going to fill up either the equivalent of a CD or a DVD. I guess there's ISO for Blu-ray, but I've never actually used those. So anyway, there's a couple of cool things you can do with an ISO. First of all, in most operating systems, certainly Windows, if you want to see the contents of an ISO, you can go through the process of mounting it. I just right-click on it and select Mount. And this is what actually shows up if I were to go through the process of burning. These are the actual files that are set up ready to go so that it would install Windows for me. Now that's great, but I want to actually go through the burn process. Now Windows makes this fairly easy. I want to unmount this guy. We'll eject him. So I want to go ahead and burn one of these. Windows does make it pretty easy. So for example, these are my Ubuntu versions. I can pick an arbitrary version of Ubuntu, and Windows has burn disk image ready to go. Now, if you have an ISO, it will automatically, assuming you've got your optical media and it's a CD or a DVD and you got it plopped in there, it will make an actual installation disk from that ISO. So if I needed to install Ubuntu through optical media, this is how I would do it, setting it up in Windows. That happens a lot. Ubuntu has all the same features. All versions of Linux have the same features. So it's actually pretty trivial to make bootable media when you have optical stuff, because every operating system has something built into it, as long as you have the ISO. Speaking of ISOs, let me show you something. Right now, I'm on the Ubuntu website, and I want to download a copy of Ubuntu. So when I click on this, I'm going to actually, I've already done this, so I want you to look in the lower left-hand corner. It downloads, do you see what that is? It's an ISO file. All versions of Linux, all distros, if you want that version, you go to their website, you download the ISO that you're interested in. You can even download in Microsoft Windows. Windows will let you download an ISO of Windows 10. You can make your own bootable media, but when you install, you better have a CD key, otherwise it won't completely work. So it's easy to get ISOs. Making them for optical media is easy. Now, what I want to do now, though, it's even more fun, is this time I want to make some ISOs and I want to put it on a thumb drive. So I've got a thumb drive plugged into my system right now. And in this case, we're going to have to use some type of tool. The tool I know and love is called Rufus. So here's good old Rufus. Rufus is totally free, it's extremely well known, and it is a great tool when you want to burn an ISO onto a thumb drive. So right now, it sees my one thumb drive right there. So it's a 2 gigabit thumb drive. And it's saying, what do you want to boot from? And I'm going to say, well, I want an ISO image. So I'm going to select an ISO image. Now, in this particular case, I have a copy of the popular Linux Mint, which is a nice distribution a lot of people like to use, sitting on my desktop there. So I'm going to select that. And what it's going to do is it's going to take this ISO and it's going to turn my thumb drive into a perfectly bootable little thumb drive, just like the Windows ones there. So I'm going to just go ahead and hit the start. It even has some little options in here. It's like, oh, now wait a minute, this particular version of Linux that you're trying to make an ISO needs a particular file. Do you want me to go up online and download it for you? And it just does it automatically. And here you take a look, it says write in ISO image mode, which is the common way. Linux also has something called DD, which we talk about in other episodes, but we're going to just do ISO. Warning, warning, you're going to lose it all. And it's going to go ahead and make an ISO image. Now, once I've got that, I now have a thumb drive, and we'll say it's a bootable thumb drive. And I can put that onto a new system, for example, with the hard drive that's completely blank, as long as I set my boot order. That's what always gets us in trouble here. Get your boot order so you're booting to that thumb drive, and it will automatically go, hello, I'm Linux Mint, would you like me to install on the hard drive? And you just go. It's really that easy and does an absolutely great job. These tools also work with, for example, Rufus works perfectly. You got an SD and you want to boot to that? As long as you have a boot order in your BIOS. A lot of BIOSes won't let you boot to flash media, but if it does, you can go ahead, Rufus, you plug this in, burn it, make yourself a nice bootable SD. Almost anything works. In fact, people who use Raspberry Pis, for example, they don't have hard drives in their little computers. They just have little SD cards. So it's very common to download what they call the Raspbian distribution, and they use Rufus to go ahead and make a little tiny, it's a micro SD, but they make it bootable. They put it in through their Raspberry Pis and it just boots up. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, there are other ways to boot. One other way to boot I want to make sure you're aware of is over a network. There are two big options when it comes to booting over a network. There's the universal, what's called PXE booting, and then there's also Apple's NetBoot. Now, these type of boot functions require you to get into your system setup, and you'll say, look, I don't want to boot from my hard drive or a thumb drive or anything. I want to boot on from the network. And depending on your solution, you often just type in a network address and you hit enter, and it will automatically boot from a properly configured server somewhere else on your network. Now, luckily for us, we don't have to go into server configuration in A+, talk to me in Network+, but you can actually boot from a network itself. This is very popular for what we call diskless workstations or thin clients, where we don't even bother putting in a hard drive. It just does a PXE boot, and all of a sudden you're in Windows, and you're like, wow, that's cool. All right, now there is one other way to boot. This is kind of unique to Windows, and I want to make sure you're aware of this. Built into every copy of Windows is the ability to basically make your own installation disk. You don't even have to get an ISO or anything. The reason behind this is because Windows, if you've got a big problem, they want you to be able to put in a disk, boot to it, and the Windows, it's really a copy of the Windows installation disk, that it will boot up and it will go and go, hey, wait a minute, I see there's a copy of Windows already installed on your hard drive. Would you like me to fix it? And it's called the Windows Recovery Environment, or WinRE. Let me show you how to make one of those. Now, first of all, you're going to have a thumb drive. And this is in the control panel, and all we do is create a recovery drive. And it'll say, what do you want to put in there? I always want to back up all my system files as well. You usually need about a 16 gigabyte thumb drive to make these guys work. So make sure you have a nice big drive. This is going to take a while. I'm just going to let it run. It's going to go and say, oh, I see you have a thumb drive. Do you want me to put it there? And you go, yes. From then on, anytime you're working with a Mike Myers system, you're always going to notice a thumb drive that's taped up on the monitor. It's because I've made a recovery drive. If I ever have a problem with this system, I'm not fumbling around looking for my original installation media. I've got my own little thumb drive. It's ready to go to save me in case something goes wrong. So you want to install your first copy of Microsoft Windows, huh? Well, congratulations. Now, before you start the installation, there's some things you need to do that I call the pre-installation tasks. Number one, do you have enough firepower to run Windows? So right here I've got from the Microsoft website the minimum hardware requirements to run, this is Windows 10. So if you take a look, a 1 gigahertz processor, 1 gigabyte of RAM for 32-bit, 2 gigabytes for 64-bit, a 16 gigabyte drive for 32-bit OS, and 32 gigabytes for a 64-bit OS, DirectX 9 graphics card, that would be Sears, so what, 1999 maybe, I don't know, 800 by 600 display, and they really want you to have an internet connection. These are laughable minimum requirements. You couldn't get Windows to run with this, but you might be able to get it to crawl. I would recommend much higher requirements than this. In particular, around 8 gigabytes of RAM might be a good idea, and for hard drive space, I would like to see a minimum of a 1/4 terabyte, if not all the way up to a full terabyte. All right, so anyway, make sure you're aware at least of these minimums. You'll probably see them on the exam. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is hardware. So you've got the minimum requirements, but you've got this Asus motherboard, or you've got this Adaptec controller, or you've got some other device that you're snapping in. Is that going to work with Windows? Well, Microsoft always has some kind of list. I always call it the hardware compatibility list. You can look them up online and see if they're compatible. There's a lot of different names for this thing. Right now I think it's called the Windows Compatibility Program, but the bottom line is there are ways to look online. The other thing you can do is type in the name of that device and see what other people are doing with it. So if you've got some new NVIDIA graphics card, go onto the NVIDIA forums and see how people are doing with your version of Windows you're interested in installing. So do a little research is what it boils down to. In an enterprise level, this gets a lot more serious. You're about to buy 10,000 new Dell laptops. And if you get it wrong, things are going to get you in trouble. In that case, the hardware manufacturers will work directly with you by talking to your representative to verify that whatever you're buying is going to be working with your version of Windows. Okay, so you've got all this hardware in front of you, and it's all plugged in, ready to go, and you have a high degree of confidence it's going to work. So we actually want to start the installation process. There's a couple of things you want to know ahead of time. Number one, you need to know your network. Now, if you're just installing at home, it's no big deal. You probably just have a default work group, no big deal. But if you're in an office environment, you could be in a domain, and you might have to set this computer up to be in a domain. And in that case, you often have very standardized naming conventions that are used within your organization. And you also will probably have a standardized domain account or even how to organize a local account for this computer. If anything I just said to you is confusing, don't panic. We cover all this stuff in more detail in other episodes. We're just worried about what we're going to have to type in while we're installing Windows. The last thing I'm going to mention, and this might be heresy, is that Microsoft in particular really wants you to make the Microsoft account, your online account, which connects to your cloud services and all that. The only downside to these cloud accounts is if you ever forget your password, you could be in real trouble, because the only way to recover your password is to be online. So it can be a bit of a double-edged sword. I recommend when you're installing Windows, and during this demonstration, we're going to be creating a local account that we have complete control of. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and let's install some Windows here. I'm going to go and plug this in. We're going to boot off this guy and start the installation process. Welcome to your Windows installation. Now, the first thing Windows 10 asks is going to be what language do you want to install, your time and currency format, and your keyboard or input method. So if you think about this, this would probably be a really good thing to get up front, because folks in Germany would probably prefer to see this in their native language and in their time and currency formats. Also, if I've got a German keyboard on here, I'd like my umlauts and all those crazy German characters to work. So here I am in the US, so the defaults are fine. Now, this next step is an important one. Now, it looks like a single button, right, where you just hit install now, but look down here. You can also go through a process called repair your computer. Now, we'll cover this in other episodes, but the main way, if you have a Windows system that won't boot, you just boot off of any installation media and go to this option. But for now, we'll just do an install. All right, now the first thing you're going to have to do is you have to have a legitimate copy of Windows. So you actually have to have a proper CD key to type in, and it's going to be 25 alphanumeric characters, and you can see they show the actual sample right here. Now, I like you guys a lot, but not enough to give away a product key for a Microsoft Windows product. So you can actually get around this momentarily by saying, I don't have a product key. What's going to happen here, it's going to allow us to install Windows. However, we're not going to be activated. Unactivated Windows systems will stop working after a set amount of time. They won't be updated and things like that. No problem, we'll put in the key later. So I'm going to install Windows 10 Pro, and of course we want to carefully read those license terms. By the way, if you ever get a chance, read them. They're absolutely terrifying. Okay, now this page right here is a big deal right now. So what it's saying is, do you want to upgrade or do you want to do a custom or a clean install? Upgrade means any applications, anything, documents you might have, anything like that, those will be kept. It'll just upgrade the operating system. And then custom means a clean install. We're going to talk about some of the upgrade issues in another episode. All right, so let's go ahead and start installing. So right now it sees only one blank drive, unallocated space. So we're going to go ahead and install on that. And then we begin the fun part that often takes a while. So it's right now copying tons of files down, getting ready to get all this set up, and this is going to take a moment. Oh look, something's happened! Or maybe not. It's going to take a few reboots. Be patient. Hi there, I'm Cortana and I'm here to help. Look, I have no problem. Cortana is the talk to your computer tool function. It works pretty good actually. I got no problem with it. Cortana will try to march us through this installation process, and I'm just going to go ahead and ignore it and turn the volume down. Let's start with the region. Yep, I'm in the United States. Do I want a US keyboard? Yes, I do. Do I want a second keyboard? Nope, just one's fine. So during the install they already asked for a keyboard layout, and now they're asking it again? I don't know. Thanks, Microsoft. What he's asking right now is, are we going to just set this up using basically a default work group, or are we going to set it up for an organization? Are you in a domain or something like that? So I'm going to go ahead and set this up for an organization. By the way, I even set it up for an organization when I'm at home. It gives me a couple more options that I really like. Oh look, we're waiting again. Okay, here we go. So first of all, Microsoft really wants you to sign in with an online Microsoft account. So what you can do instead is right here, see where it says domain join? Click on that, even if you're not joining a domain. The whole goal here during a Windows install is to create a local user account. And Microsoft really doesn't want you to do that. They really want you to make the online account and all that stuff. Now we can go ahead and type in a name. Now look in the lower left-hand corner. I'm telling you, they really want you to join online. So we're going to give this an account name. Keep it real simple. Again, now here's where if you were in an organization, they might require you to type something in specific. So we're going to create a super memorable password. Yep, real complicated. And let's make sure we're typing in the right password. And the summary security questions. Here's my first pet's name, Timmy. Security question number 2. What was your childhood nickname? Timmy. Question number 3. What is the city you were born? Timmy. Okay, now I'm doing this for personal use, and a lot of people do exactly what I've done here, where you have all of these different security questions and you just pick one word for it. Maybe for a Windows install that's not that big of a deal, but you might not want to consider doing things like that for your banking account security questions. Anyway, so do we want to use Cortana? Well, I'm not playing Halo, so I'm going to decline. Now, here's where we're going to get into the infamous Windows telemetry. So this is a matter of personal choice. Me, I give enough away as it is to my Android phone, so I'm going to say no. Most of these options are actually incredibly convenient, but it is going to give away some telemetry, some of your personal information back up to Microsoft. Things like knowing where your location is. Well, for my desktop, maybe that's not such a big deal. If I'm going to use Cortana, it wants to store voice information. If I want to use inking, where I'm using handwriting, it's going to want to store information like that. It also says, do you want me to tailor your ads? I don't know about you, it's bad enough that I get ads in my web browsers, and that Microsoft now puts ads on my desktop is a little bit of a challenge. So let me show you what I do with this page. No. Whoops, he really wants to stay there. You can make your own choices here. A lot of people have looked at this telemetry. Microsoft does a good job with security. It is not identified to you as a person, but it's a matter of personal choice here. Okay, we're waking up, yay. Okay, it sees my network. Whenever I see that blue bar, that means Windows sees a new network. I'm going to say, do I want to be discoverable? Oh yeah. All right, so this is how Windows 10 is currently opening up, by opening up the Edge browser, because they really want you to get all over the browser as well. So that is the default Windows installation. So if you think you're done, you're not. All we've done up to this point is get Windows with the default installation. We've got a million jobs to do that are so important, I separate them into a different episode called Post-Installation Tasks. Once you've installed Windows onto a system, that's where the real work begins. So in this section, which I call post-installation tasks, these are all the little jobs we've got to do after Windows is installed. So the first place we want to head over to is Device Manager. Now, when you do an initial install, Windows has tons and tons and tons of device drivers in there, but if you take a look, you'll see that we show a couple of errors here. And they're invariably really scary errors like base system device or South Bridge controller or core system. What you're looking at here is there's stuff on the motherboard itself that Windows simply doesn't recognize. And in that case, what we've got to do is we've got to find the optical media that comes with this motherboard, and we have to go through the process of installing it. This can take a while, and a lot of times, especially if you're buying a motherboard that's a couple of years old, it's still a great motherboard, but the drivers themselves are probably a little bit obsolete even on here. So then what we end up doing is we have to go online. So all I did was a quick search of the model of this particular motherboard, and I found the manufacturer's website. They all have these. So this one wants me to choose an operating system. So I've got Windows 10 64-bit, and you can see that there are a lot of drivers that are in here, and I promise you, these are much newer than the ones on the motherboard driver disk. So the trick here is grabbing a thumb drive. Usually I have to go to another system because a lot of times even the network card isn't working on a new Windows install. Go to another system, grab a thumb drive, download all the drivers, then plug that into your new system and start installing all this stuff. There's a million ways to do it. A lot of them will have like a default, one screen will come up and it'll say, here's all the different things, and it's going to be like the core stuff. There's going to be one for like your SATA. There's going to be one for RAID if that's available. There's usually one for audio. So, and they break them down usually into 3, 4, up to 10 different subsections. You just install them all. Oh, and by the way, don't install the extra web browser and other garbage that they tend to put in these types of installs. The bottom line is you're going to have to take a good amount of time installing all of the different motherboard drivers, and that's a normal case of events. The other big issue is with the video cards themselves. Video cards have amazing capabilities, and their device drivers tend to update quite a bit. A lot of times, Windows will not recognize your device driver, or it will put in a dated device driver. In that case, once again, you're reduced to grabbing optical media and doing an update, but if you were me, I always go to the manufacturer and get the latest drivers for my video card to make sure that they're in good order. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start doing all this updating. Give me a minute. When I get back, we should have a very pretty device manager. All right, so it's taken me a few tries, but I've been installing device drivers for a while, and all of a sudden, well, things are already looking prettier. Notice that the resolution of the screen seems nicer. Wow, how pretty is that? You have to take your time with these device drivers. It just takes a while as you go through these, or you're going online to download them, whatever you got to do, just make sure you take your time and you get them. The ultimate test is pretty simple. Open up Device Manager and see how it looks. Now that is a pretty device manager. In fact, it's a little small. Good thing I've got a high resolution monitor here. But what's important is even at this resolution, I can quickly see I don't have any more exclamation points. All of the hardware is in the system. Windows recognizes it, and it has good device drivers. Now, just because the hardware is working right, there's some other stuff we need to be doing now. In particular, we need to be preparing for problems for the future. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that my Windows itself is being updated. I think I can make these icons a little bit bigger. So let's fire up Windows Update. Well, it's a brand new install, so there's no updates available yet. However, this is where I want to go ahead and make sure that I've got my active hours. When are the times I don't want this thing to update? So between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. by default, it's never going to try to restart the device or anything like that. You can also set up some advanced options here. For example, you can updates of other Microsoft products. For example, if you have Office on here, you can automatically download the updates even over like metered data connections. So you might want to be careful with that one. Show a notification. I like to have that one show up because I want to see if it's going to reboot. And then I can actually pause updates. Now this brings up a really, really important issue. With Windows, in particular Windows 10, You don't have the option to not accept updates. They just happen. There is no ability for you to absolutely shut down updates. The only way you can do that is if you use a very specific version of Windows called Windows Enterprise, and you're not going to go to the store and buy one of those. Those are only for large enterprise customers. So the bottom line is you will get updates. You can pause them for a while, but you're never ever going to stop them. All right, so it looks like I've got all my update options set up pretty good. I'm happy with that. The next thing I want to start talking about is the concept of what I call a recovery disk. So let me show you how to do that. So a recovery drive is nothing more than your own personal copy of a Windows installation media. Now, you can also back up the system files to the recovery drive. This particular option isn't that critical. We will cover this in other episodes when we're talking about repairing Windows. But for now, I'm just going to turn it off. And it's going to take a minute, but what it's going to do, it's going to look for a flash drive. And by the way, that flash drive has to be 16 gigabytes to do this. And it's going to go ahead and basically make Windows installation media. Now you might say to yourself, well, Mike, I've got my original installation media. Why would I want another? Well, because we protect this. This goes in a closet and we don't touch it. We leave it alone. So we have our own copy and we'll keep that around. So that's the first thing you want to do. The next thing we want to do is create a restore point. Now, a restore point is kind of like a snapshot of my system as it currently is. So what I've got right now is a Windows system that is properly installed. I've got all my device drivers in there. You know, it's updating, which is great, but there's no applications. There's nothing in here. The restore point we're going to create basically says, I want a copy of how it is right now. So if I have a problem in the future, then I could come back to this point. This is particularly important during your post-installation tasks because we're notorious for installing bad applications that do naughty things and lock up computers, and I want to be able to get back to where I was before. So let's go ahead and make a restore point. So to make a restore point, all we need to do is we're going to turn on what we call system protection. So this will allow us to make restore points. Now, we can actually set how much drive space. The problem is restore points can be a little bit large, so we're just going to leave that alone for right now. I'm going to hit OK. And now I can create a restore point. Now we got to give it some descriptive name. Just installed Windows 10. Although I would normally include a date as well, however, all of the restore points are timestamped, so not really critical. So it's now going to make this restore point. Now, I'm going to hopefully never have to use it as the best example, but if I ever run into a situation, particularly when I'm doing my initial application installs and my system's locking up or acting weird, I can just go back to that restore point and try again, figure out what's wrong with my applications. Okay, now the next thing we have to do is almost a non-issue. I just want to bring it up because Windows does this automatically, and that's anti-malware and firewall. Wow, okay. Setting up your anti-malware and your firewall is handled all under your Windows security settings. So let's go ahead and open up Windows Security. And right now you can see that everything's got a green checkbox because basically everything's pre-installed. If you get Windows 10 today, it comes with anti-malware not only installed but working properly. It has a firewall set up so that if some program tries to start talking outside and you don't want it to, you can catch it. It does a really good job by default. The only time this becomes interesting at all is if something goes wrong and you need to fix it. Like for example, there is no such thing as a perfect anti-malware tool, and sometimes you might have a problem where you need to go in and turn off your anti-malware. We have huge episodes that cover all this, but this is something we do right at the beginning, and these days it's really just a check and go, yep, everything looks good. Okay, one more thing and we're done with our post-installation tasks, and that's something called file history. File history is a tool that allows you to keep backup copies of anything you're changing. Now, I mean on a file-by-file basis. So right now file history is turned off. It is turned off by default, so I want to get this turned on. And it's going to take a while. I'm not going to sit here and stare at this. So that's a lot of post-installation tasks. For a lot of us technicians, it takes us longer to do the post-installation tasks than the actual installation of Windows itself. There's a lot of different ways to install Windows on a system, and in this episode I want to talk about the Windows installation options you have out there. Now the simplest one we have is called a clean install. With a clean install, you're starting with blank storage and you put a Windows installation media in and you install from it onto that blank media. Equally, it could be a drive that has an old copy of Linux on it or something like that, and you do a clean install by wiping that drive and then installing Windows. The other option you have is what we call an upgrade install. You've already got an existing copy of an old Windows 7 computer laying around or an old Windows 8.1 computer, and you want to upgrade it to Windows 10. You can do that, but the only thing you need to remember is that an upgrade basically keeps all your stuff. So you've got your applications, you've got your sign-on, you've got your pretty desktop the way you want it, and all you want to do is go from, say, Windows 7 to Windows 10. You have to be careful with this because Microsoft creates some limitations. In general, the big thing you need to remember is that if you have an older home version, you're only going to be able to upgrade to Windows 10 home version. If you have an older professional or workstation, depending on what version it is, you'll only be able to upgrade to Windows 10 Pro. Now, if you were to say to me, well, Mike, I've got an old Windows 7 home system and I want to upgrade to Windows 10 Pro. And I'm saying, you can, but you're going to be doing a clean install, and I hope you've kept all of your applications and everything because they're going to be needed to be reinstalled as well. So that's one way to do it. But there's some more interesting options. A very rarely used option anymore is something called multi-boot. So let's assume I have a system that's got one C drive in it. And now this C drive has got a copy of Windows Server. It's some other version of Windows. Now what I want to do is I want to multi-boot where I can boot to either Windows 10 or to this. So in order to multi-boot, number one, I'm going to have some extra hard drive. So I could install another hard drive, for example, but if I wanted to, I could actually use some of the unpartitioned space on the primary drive. So either way works just fine. Windows 10 will be in the boot information at the beginning, and then once I do this installation, every time I boot up this computer, I'll get a really cool looking screen that looks like this. So you can see I could choose to boot either between Windows Server or Windows 10. This is a classic example of multi-boot. For a lot of us, we're doing installations for lots of systems at one time. I'll have 25 laptops come in, and I want these laptops to be customized so that people can put in their username and their password, but on the same token, I want everybody's keyboards, for example, to be pre-configured. For these types of situations, we do what's called an unattended installation. The idea behind an unattended installation is that we generate something called an answer file. This answer file basically answers as many of those questions during the installation as possible, depending on our needs, and then it will only pop up the screens that are necessary for the particular user. For example, one of them I might do is they get to type in their own username and password, but everything else is preset up for them. To do this, we use a tool called the Windows System Image Manager. I've got a copy of it right here. So this is a free tool that comes from Microsoft, and you go through and you set up a bunch of fairly esoteric and complicated things. It takes some practice to get the tool, but the end result is you create a file called autounattend.xml. This file is then put into, so this is an ISO, this is a regular Windows installation. All I have to do is drag this in here, and the moment I boot up with this little thumb drive, it's going to read that autounattend XML, and anything that I've pre-answered, it won't even show that up during the installation process. So when you have a lot of systems, but you want people to have a little flexibility in terms of how they want to customize a few things, these can be absolutely amazing tools. Now, there's another way to do it, and this gets a little bit more complicated. Let's come up with a situation where I've got a whole bunch of new computers. So I've got a whole bunch of new laptops. No, I didn't draw that many here, but imagine this could be potentially hundreds of laptops. And all the laptops are identical. That's an important point, folks. The hardware has to be identical, okay? Now, what I can do is I can take one laptop and I can install Windows on there. I can even install applications. I can even set desktops and have it join domains and have this thing perfectly set up. And then what I'll do, and this is invariably done on a network, I will then distribute the image of that system to all of the other computers and simultaneously update all of the individual computers from that one image. So this type of image deployment, now Windows has tools built in like the user state migration tool, that would work, but a lot of us use third-party tools with names like Ghost, and all that they do is they take an image and they propagate it to lots and lots of other computers. Image deployment has some real benefits over unattended. For example, I can install applications. I can set up the firewall in just a certain way and everybody gets the exact same thing. So there's benefits to both. Just make sure you're comfortable with the difference between those two. And remember, there's a lot of different options when it comes to installing Windows, and for the exam, at least make sure you're comfortable conceptually with the ones we've just discussed. Okay, people, it's now time to start getting serious as we start digging into some of the innards of Windows. Now, I'm going to warn you right now, I go a little bit deeper than the CompTIA A+ exam requires because, quite simply, you need to know this stuff. So I'll be a little bit clear about what CompTIA wants you to know and what I want you to know so you can actually fix computers for a living. But keep in mind, as we dive down into Windows, this is really, really important stuff. And probably the most important place to start is with the Windows registry. Inside every operating system, there has to be some place to keep settings. What is my current internet address? What are all the users on my system and what are their passwords? What color desktop am I using? What applications are installed? If I double click on a file with a docx extension, what application needs to fire up to associate with that? There are hundreds of thousands of questions like this that even the most simple individual machine has to answer, and we've got to store that somewhere. Now, if you look at operating systems like Linux, for example, they store most of this information in text files. Billions and billions of text files, and anything you want to do in terms of configuration, for example, like in Ubuntu, you're working on some pretty dialog box, but what you're really doing is updating a text file someplace. It was also that way with Windows back in the old days. Today, though, Windows uses a single storage area called the registry. This is not a text file. It is a binary file that can only be read by a particular program called regedit. Well, I should qualify that. Lots of programs can talk to the registry, but if you want to look at it in its raw format, the tool we use is called regedit. Now, before I show you regedit, would you like to see the registry? It's right here on my screen. Here I am in my Windows folder, System32 config. And if you look any of these larger files, for example, security, software, system. All of these files collectively are the actual registry. Your registry is absolutely critical. Windows won't boot without it. You are in deep trouble if you lose your registry. Take a look back on that screen. You'll even see a folder called RegBack. That is one of about 4 different backup copies of the registry that Windows keeps. If it corrupts, Windows does a pretty good job of using other sources to try to get your registry back, because without it, you're in trouble. Now, most of the time, we do not go into the registry in its raw format. We're just going into a control panel applet, or we're setting up a settings or something like that. And those are the ones that are actually changing the registry. However, there are some situations where you might get a call from somebody saying, we need you to go into the registry. So there's some nomenclature that I want you guys to be comfortable with. So let's go ahead and get started, and let's fire up regedit. When you fire up regedit, it grabs all those different files and organizes them into these 5 root keys. So the first one, HKey classes root, is the one you'll least ever go into, and that basically everything that is in your computer, it doesn't matter what it is going to be defined in terms of what it can do. So this is a particular file type, and this tells us who is the type of program who's going to run it if I ever see a file with that extension, and then it also gives some idea of what type of information is in there. If we want to, we can go a lot deeper than this. For example, all those icons you know and love, say like your Word icons, whenever you make a Word document, we can go in here and manually change those any way we want. So this is the most complicated and least interesting of the 5. I'm going to skip down to the 3rd one next. This is HKey local machine. HKey local machine defines all the settings for this computer. So anything from what drivers are in there, what type of hardware you're using, what software is installed, how is Windows configured, what kind of desktop background or screensaver you have, are all stored here in HKey local machine. Now when you have different users may be taking advantage of different aspects of the hardware of the system, and that's where HKey current config comes from. So HKey current config defines what software, what aspects of the system are being used right now. So HKey current config is actually a subset of HKey local machine. Now we have the same issue with users. So HKey users lists all of the different users that are on this computer. These numbers are actual different user accounts. So this will define how their console is set up, what type of device drivers they might want to use that might be different. Say one person has a different keyboard layout than another. So this is all of the different users on here. And then HKey current user is actually a subset of this. It takes one of these and pulls it up here, and that is the information for whoever is currently logged in. There's a lot of abbreviations that are used when we're going into the registry like this. For example, instead of people saying HKey local machine, usually you'll hear people just say HKLM. This is a shorthand when people are talking about the registry, and you need to be a little bit comfortable with that. All right, so what I want to do now is I want to drill down into the registry. I'm going to go way down in here and just pick a, I'm not arbitrary, but a specific location to show you some of the cool things it can do. So I'm going to go to HKey local machine, and I'm going to go to software, and then down to Microsoft. And then to Windows, current version. Yeah, isn't this wildly complicated? Run. Do you see that right there? This is one of the many places where anything that auto starts on your computer is going to show up. So I've got some Adobe stuff. There's something with my mouse on here. And I've got Windows Defender, which automatically starts right here. Right next to that is run once. And that is something where if you put a setting in here, it will run one time and then erase itself. So pretty much whenever you come in here, it's going to be empty by default. The big thing we tend to do with the registry is we have to add values. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to add a setting to that run key. So let's go ahead and do that. So to add something, I'm going to say new key. And in this key, I can type anything I want. How's that? And now that I'm in this key, I can set any type of value that I want. So string values, binary values, whatever I want, I can go ahead, we'll do something easy like a string. And then I can actually put a value in there. And you have just manually edited a value into the registry. Look, neither the real world nor CompTIA is going to expect you to become a registry expert. But there are lots of problems we run into with real computers where you're going to go online and it's going to say, go to HKLM/current, you get the idea? And it's going to tell you to punch something in. So you need to have the ability to be able to read that stuff and recognize, oh, they want me to open up regedit and put some value in. This happens all the time as a tech when I'm working on systems. Now the other thing you might want to do is you might want to save something. So what we're going to do right now is we're actually going to cut off a piece of the registry and make a copy of it. So let's say I want to keep all of this stuff in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export. So we go to export. I'm going to just dump it on my desktop and I'm going to call it Mike. Not Mike Myers. And if you look right here, what I've done is I've actually pruned a piece of my registry off and I've got a copy of it. We do this where there's situations where like, oh man, I'm getting nervous, I'm putting all these values in and is it going to blow my system up? So we'll do stuff like this to keep an original copy, and then that way if I have a problem, I can go ahead and bring it back in. Let's do that now. So to put this back into my registry, I could just right click on it and select merge. And it's like, warning, warning, warning. Now it's exactly what we had in there before, but in this case we actually merged them back in. If you're going to be messing with the registry, and you are, it's really, really important that you always export before you make any changes and then have a backup. Or the other way around, you can make a change and then save it, and then that way if it works really good, you can sit there for the other 500 computers, you can just send everybody that reg file and it will go ahead and, hey, just merge that into your registry and we'll take care of problem X. The registry is absolutely critical. Without it, Windows will not run. The tool that we use to access the registry in the raw is regedit. But keep in mind, anytime you're in control panel or in settings, you're really making changes to the registry all the darn time. Did you know that at any given moment, your typical Windows system is running hundreds of programs at any given moment? Now that might surprise you because you'd be, well, Mike, I just got like one window open. I don't see that many programs. Well, my friends, there's lots of programs running. We can take all the programs that are on your computer and break them down into two discrete groups. First are going to be the applications, and that's the stuff they are in a window and they're running away. Or you might see them in the lower right-hand corner sometime. For example, something like something to configure your wireless network. The important thing is there's a bunch of programs that run on your computer that we can actually see and deal with that we're going to call applications. However, there's also a whole other bunch of programs running that we call services. They're running in the background. Now we're going to talk a lot more about applications and services in other episodes, but when you combine applications and services together, what you get are processes. A process is a program that's actually running and taking up memory. Windows has to manage all of these hundreds of processes on your system so they don't stomp on each other in RAM, so that they've got enough memory to do whatever they need to do, so we can erase them when the program's done. So dealing with processes is a really, really big deal that we have to deal with as techs. So what I've got over here is a Windows 10 system running Task Manager. Now we're going to talk a lot more about Task Manager in other episodes, but right here I want to deal with one very specific tab, and this is the Details tab. What you're looking at here are all of the processes that are running on this computer right now. Let me keep scrolling. Yeah, there's a lot of them. What's important for you to look at is right here. Do you see that where it says PID? That's called your process ID. Every process that's running on your computer gets what's known as a process ID. Now, a few of these at the top, system interrupt and system idle process, they don't really get a process ID because what they're talking about is when we're not running anything. So those don't get really a process ID number. However, if you take a look, you'll see all of these individual processes. Notice that they're all almost exe files. And if I accidentally say program instead of process, that's okay, but they really are processes. Okay, first of all, you need to know what processes are running on your computer. And in this particular example, we're using Task Manager, although there's some other tools that will also do this. So one of the things that's always fun to do is you take a look at a particular process here, and you can say, well, I can go ahead and end it. So let's go ahead and end that. Now, if I try to do this, I will probably freeze my computer up. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. So arbitrarily deleting processes that you don't know what they do can often be a very dangerous thing. Now, I want you to take a look at something else in here. So if I right-click on this, you'll see it says something called End Process Tree. I want to talk about that for a minute. When you run a program like, say, Microsoft Word, that's going to be a program usually called winword.exe. So you're just clicking on an icon, but what's really happening is winword.exe is getting a little bit of memory space to begin loading it so you get your blank page and all that. The thing is that winword.exe doesn't know how to make scroll bars, for example, or how to be windowed or minimized or full screen. That's because there are other libraries. They're often known as dynamic link libraries or DLLs, although they can also be exe files that store that information. Look, it's a lot easier for me if I've got to write a Windows program that I don't have to rewrite all the code for how do scroll bars appear and stuff like that that's inherent to all Windows systems. We also have a lot of programs, like for example, a lot of networking programs that lean on other networking programs in order to run. The end result of this is you end up getting this dependency hierarchy or a tree of all of these different processes. So you've got to be really careful. If you arbitrarily pick a process, there might be 7 or 8 other programs, other processes, see, even I do it, that are dependent on that, and you can cause trouble. So if I right-click on this and say End Process Tree, I may not only shut down that program, but I could be shutting down lots of other programs that are dependent on it. What I want to do is show you is a very cool program. This is a program that comes from Microsoft. And it's written by a guy named Mark Russinovich, who had his own website for decades called SysInternals. And he's so good and he's so amazing that Microsoft basically bought him an ivory tower and said, just keep writing programs. We love what you're doing. He's got zillions of programs, but the one I want to show you in particular is a program called Process Explorer. This is Process Explorer. Process Explorer is probably one of Mark Russinovich's most popular programs, and he's written a ton of them. What's important to show here is that you can actually see the dependency tree. Do you see the little indentations? So I know that this services program is directly dependent on this program called WinInit. So it gives you an idea of who's calling who. Now, if I try to right-click on something, I still have kill process and kill process tree. Most of these programs that are off of like this WinInit, for example, these are all actually under the control of the operating system itself, and those are things that really, thank goodness, we can't turn them off. But as we come down here towards the bottom, there are some things we can turn off. For example, I've got something called Teams, and Teams actually calls to itself. That happens sometimes. And in this case, I should be able to shut this off. Fantastic. And in this case, I was able to cut off the entire tree of dependency in one big shot. Now, The trick to understanding processes, at this point in the game, I just want to make sure you know that they're there. I want to make sure you understand that they have a process ID and that everything that runs on your computer, be it applications or services, everything's a process. Have you ever wondered how your networking is always just working? Have you ever noticed that you can connect to a wireless network and then the next day you're still connected to it if you want? There's a lot of things that go on in the background of Windows to make your life a lot easier. And this is a group of processes known collectively as services. So in this episode, I want us to take a look at services and see some of the things we can do with them. So the best place to start is with an actual program called Services. Services is one of the older programs that come with Windows, and his job is to do nothing more than manage the many services that are on your computer. So let me open this a little bit. There we go. What I want you to look at first of all is this is all of the installed services on this computer right now. There is a bunch. So the other thing I want you to take a look at, first is a description. It kind of describes why this exists. And here's the biggie right here. Do you see this? It says either it's blank or it's running. So as you can see, a lot of services are running, but a lot are not running. So services can be turned on and off based on need. We can manually fire them up, and that's kind of what I want to play with right here. So let's find a particular service that looks interesting. How about Windows Backup? So this is a backup program. Now this service will light up when I start the Windows Backup application, then the service works with it in the background. So first of all, let's right-click on it and select Properties. And here's all the fun things we can do with it. Here's a description, gives you an idea of what it does. And then here's the startup type, and this is the big deal. Normally, it's going to start up automatic. You can start it with a delayed start. You could set a time frame for it, or you can completely disable it. This is set to manual because it's only going to be started when the backup application starts, so we'll leave it as manual. Now, the other thing we can do is disable it, and it's often a really good idea to disable certain services, but I want to make sure you know where to do it if you need to. Now we can also say what we're going to do with it right now. Right now it's stopped. If we wanted to, we could start it. It's not going to really hurt anything. It's just eating up a little memory. I could stop it if I want to as well. So just for funsies, let's go ahead and start it back up one time. And I'm going to fire up Task Manager. Now this can be a little bit of a trick, but I'm pretty sure we can pull this off. Let's find that guy. I can't find the thing. Ah, but there's a clue. The reason I can't find it, let me scroll through this a little bit. Do you see all these service hosts? Service host is like the Swiss Army knife of services for Windows. A lot of super important, and I mean really important services, are all just built into this one big executable. So the reason I knew that it's a service host service, take a look back over here under its properties. You can see it says service host and then whatever particular service that it wants to run. That's what those little values right there mean. We're going to be seeing a lot more of services throughout this series. What's important right now is that you are aware that services exist, that you can start them, you can stop them, and that you can set them that they start up either automatically or manually, or very important, you can disable them. There's going to be plenty of scenarios in this series where we need to go in services and turn stuff off or disable them. Now that we're starting to get a feel of all the tools that are in Windows, I'm going to take this a bit deeper. A question that comes to me all the time is, well, Mike, how do I get to this tool, or how do I get to that tool, or which tool am I supposed to use for what or the other? Well, in this episode, what I want to do is kind of get Zen-like about the different tool sets there are within Windows. Now, obviously, we've got lots more episodes that cover more tools, but in this particular one, I want to just talk about where do you go to get to tools more than anything else. So the first thing I want to start off with is good old right-click. Right-click is your best buddy when it comes to Windows. With right-click, I can do just about anything I want. So here I am in File Explorer. So if I want to, I can right-click on, for example, this PC, and I can select Properties, and it's going to take me to something that has to do with the PC in general. In this particular one, we're talking about System from the control panel. It just tells us things like the version. We're going to see that again in other episodes. I can right-click on a folder and select Properties, and it's going to give me properties about that particular folder. Trust me, we're going to go all kinds of folders things. I can right-click just on the desktop, and if I right-click on the desktop, I get options that help me configure the desktop. In this case, the display if I want, or if I personalize it, that's going to let me do things like backgrounds and screensavers, that type of stuff. Even the Windows key can be right-clicked on. So if I right-click on this, you'll notice that I get a quick shortcut to all kinds of different tools. Even the taskbar down here. If I right-click on this, I can go to my taskbar settings. The bottom line is, when in doubt, if you've got to mess with something, what I need you to do is right-click on it, and most times select Properties. Right-click is always going to be your buddy, so when in doubt, right-click. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, the exam is not going to test you on which buttons do you click to get to where. Not going to happen. There'll be a couple of hotkeys, and we'll cover those for certain applications, but the bottom line is, don't panic about where did Mike go to get to Task Manager, or how did Mike get to System Properties. Make sure that you're understanding conceptually that your right-click can often be your best buddy when in doubt. Okay, the second place I want you to look for stuff is in the old school control panel. One of the nice things I like about Windows is I can simply just type in something. You can see control panel up at the top, and it gets me automatically to where I want to go. Your other place to look for anything is going to be in control panel. Now, while we're in here, I want to show you a couple things that drive me insane. This is what default control panels look like to most people. That's fine for normal people, but for weirdo users like us, I strongly recommend you go into either a large icon, a little too big for me, or a small icon view. I don't like that extra step in there. I want to see everything that's in the control panel from one particular shot. Now, if you've been watching other episodes, we've already been in here quite a bit. You just didn't know it. For example, here's Device Manager. Here's BitLocker. There's a lot of stuff we've already played with. So make sure, if you're unsure where to go, try the control panel. You'll probably find what you need. Now, while we're in control panel, there is one particular control panel applet, as we say, that I want you to notice. And it's right up here on mine in the upper left-hand corner. By the way, your control panel could be different than mine, depending on what you install. A lot of utilities like anti-malware and things like that will put in their own little icons in here. So if there's a little difference between yours and mine, don't panic, it's okay. Anyway, back to administrative tools. So if you click on this, administrative tools really has a lot of important things that we're going to need to do. So I don't want to go into a lot of detail right now because we have episodes that cover lots of these, but there is one I want to touch on, and it's right here. It's called System Configuration. System Configuration is a very handy tool for a lot of stuff that starts at the beginning of your system, when your system boots up. So for example, if I want to do a normal, just regular normal startup, I could do that. I can do a diagnostic startup, which is just going to load some really basic stuff. And then we can do a selective startup, which you'll see it's already preset here. And it'll simply say, do I want to load just services? Do I want to load startup items? And then you always have to do original boot configuration. So what it's giving you is the option. It says, look, you've got a bunch of services that are pre-configured to auto start. Do you want to load those or not? Secondly, you have a bunch of programs that are pre-configured to auto load. Do you want them to start or not? So this is where we would go to handle that. The next tab is your boot tab. There's not much to do in here. Generally what it's saying is what operating systems are currently in your boot partition and which one do you want to run. Now on 99% of computers these days there's only one operating system, and there's my Windows 10. And I can do a few other extra settings here which we'll get into when we talk about fixing Windows. Here's services. Now here's the interesting thing about system configuration. Let's say you've got a problem with some particular service. You've just installed something and you know it installed a service because during the installation it said, I'm installing service XYZ. And then you start having problems. One of the nice things about system configuration is I can go in and you can see where I uncheck stuff. So by unchecking something, I will prevent that and only that service from starting up. So that can be a real convenience if you want to just reboot and say, okay, I've turned off Bluetooth, now what's happening? And I use this quite a bit myself. Next is startup. Now startup used to be under system configuration. It's now in Task Manager. We'll take a little sneak over there and you can see actually what programs are starting up, and I can unload them at this point. I can disable them at this point. If something's starting up that's causing me trouble, I can take care of it here. And the last one is tools, which to be honest with you, I don't use very much. It's just yet another way to get to even more tools. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave that be as it is. Microsoft is notorious for having 18 ways to get to any one given tool. I have seen technicians get in fist fights because the best way to get to some certain control panel applet is this way, and another guy wants to do it another way. And I don't care, just pick one and you'll be all right. All right, the last one I want to touch on is settings. Settings has a lot of overlap with Control Panel. I'm pretty sure that the goal of Microsoft is one day to get rid of Control Panel and only use settings. What's interesting is that you'll find yourself in a lot of situations where you're in settings and then you get pushed to a Control Panel applet. So for example, here's some microphone input. If I click on this, it actually pushes me to a Control Panel applet. So you can see pretty clearly there's a big difference in the look and feel of a settings applet versus a Control Panel applet. The bottom line is, if you're digging for something, you're going to have to pick your choices between a right click, Control Panel, or settings. However, Microsoft makes this so much easier today. All you have to do is go down into your search bar, type in the name of the tool that you're looking for, and it pops right up. And remember, the test is never going to test you on paths. Techs are always going to ask me, Mike, there's so many utilities within the Windows universe. What do you turn to first? Well, there is no single answer for that, but what I will say is that Task Manager is like, to me, the thermometer or the blood pressure meter of your system. If I want a quick idea of what's going on with my computer, Task Manager is going to be my first stop. So what I want to do is we're going to be looking at Task Manager both in Windows 7, because it's on the exam, as well as a modern Task Manager in Windows 10. When people ask me a lot of questions, don't they? Anyway, when people say, what are some of the big differences between different versions of Windows? The answer is that a lot of the utilities are dramatically different from one version to the next. A lot of utilities are identical. But Task Manager is a big one that has really changed, and I've really got to show it to you both ways. So let's go ahead and take a look at Task Manager starting with Windows 7. So here I am at a standard Windows 7 desktop. Now there's a lot of ways to get to Task Manager. So one of them is a hotkey. We use good old Control-Alt-Delete. So if I hit Control-Alt-Delete, you'll see I get a number of options here in Windows 7. One of them is Start Task Manager. So I'm going to close it. Let's try it again. Now this time I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-Shift-Escape. That gets me into Task Manager. Remember I told you in other episodes that you're not going to be tested on the CompTIA exam about paths? what do you click to get to something? Well, the CompTIA exam will quiz you on certain hotkeys, and you just heard them here, folks. All right, so here we are in Task Manager. Now, what I want to do is just go through all of the different tabs here. So you'll see we've got 6 tabs across the top. First off is Applications. Right now, I don't have any applications running. Let's see, it's got Internet Explorer here, so we'll get that up and cooking. And now you can see an actual application shows up here. This is convenient because we can go in here, we can switch to an application, you can actually close it if you want to, you can even go to the process that's actually running that thing. So since the next tab is Processes, let's cheat and use this to go to the next tab. This is how Windows 7 Task Manager shows you what processes are running. So if we want to, we can certainly end processes here. Yeah, I really want to. And that's about all you can do in this particular tab. Next is Services, a quick snapshot of what services are on your system, which ones are running, which ones are stopped. You can come in here and start and stop services if you want to. Next is Performance. So Performance is a great tool because it kind of just gives you a little quick overview of how your system's running. In particular, though, I want to talk about memory because that's the big thing. Everybody's like, do I have enough RAM? And Microsoft is notorious about not saying something as simple as, yes, you've got enough. So basically, though, if you take a look at this particular system right now, I have very little free RAM. So basically, you take available and free and you combine them, and that's the amount of free RAM you have. So right now, this is a pretty busy system, and I can believe that. I got a lot running in the background. Next is Networking, and that's just going to give you a quick snapshot of how hard your networking is working. On this particular system, I'm doing nothing on the network, so it's pretty much flatlined. Let's see if we can push that. So you can see as I'm loading this web page, we're getting a little bit of network activity. So it's at least a quick, rough idea of how hard your network card's working. Bring this back to the middle. And the last one is Users. This is showing us who is currently logged in. Now that might surprise you for a minute. You're like, well, I'm on the system, I'm logged in, sure, but you're saying other people can be logged in? Oh yeah, absolutely. There could be a remote access connection where someone's logged in. Somebody was logged in, they walked away, and you didn't even sign them out. You just logged into your own desktop. Windows is very powerful. It can handle lots and lots of logins simultaneously, and this can often be a very interesting place when you're like, well, I see myself, but who in the world is this other person? It can be a very powerful tool. Now, Windows 7 Task Manager was great, but it had some real limitations. So Microsoft came up with a more granular, more powerful tool called Resource Monitor. To get to Resource Monitor, we just click on the Performance tab and there's a button for us. The whole idea behind Resource Monitor is just to give us a little bit more granular view of what's going on our computer. So it's broken into 4 big areas: CPU, disk, network, and memory. So again, we see all of the different processes that are running. Now what's interesting is that back in Windows 7, this is the only place you could get your process ID. So that's an important thing to remember. Also, I can take a look at my disk and I can see all of the different things that are reading and writing to my disk at any given moment. So we can see exactly what processes are going in and out of my network. And the one I like to use the most is memory. One of the big things we're always worrying about on our computers is, why is my computer running slow? Now you can take a look at this and you can see that I am almost pegging out the CPU. So there is something in the background that's taking up a lot of power. But equally, you can also see that there is a lot of disk writing going on. And the big test is this right here. You see where it says hard faults per second? When a program is running in memory, it is a process, and it is taking up a certain amount of memory. This memory is allocated in something called pages. If a program is up there and suddenly it needs a page and it's not there because maybe it needs to load another executable or something else and has to go to a hard drive, that's what we call a hard fault. Now, that happens. It's going to happen a lot. You know, so if I'm getting a few hard faults per second, I don't care. But if I start seeing 100 hard faults a second, 200 hard faults a second, and my computer's running slow, this is a screaming example of you don't have enough RAM-itis. And that's why Microsoft puts that up there. So if we look, let's look back on there, and you can see this is pegging really, really hard. There's literally no better way to tell if a computer needs more RAM than this. It's hitting the swap file and it's slowing the system down. So not only do we get a lot of hard page faults, but I can actually watch the disk activity going crazy because he's having to read from the hard drive to get some data, and heaven forbid he's probably writing at the same time. So we'll just go absolutely bonkers here. Make sure you're aware that that is there. By the way, the resource monitor in the latest version of Windows still acts the exact same way. Okay. Let's scroll along the other tabs now. So here's CPU. Now in this case, what you're only seeing is CPU specific stuff. So for example, this is almost a perfect copy of what we just saw in the overview. But then we're going to actually see the services. What's nice here is that if you've got a lot of background processes that are eating up memory, right here it's going to show. Basically it's saying how many of these services as a percentage of CPU is making your computer work. So that's a very, very handy tool. The others I personally don't use. I think they're more of a programmer function. Handles are simply different types of connections. So if you want to be a programmer and you want to get into all that stuff, feel free. The bottom line is that Windows 7 Task Manager was pretty weak and it required a lot of help from Resource Monitor for diagnosis. We needed Windows 10 to come up with a real Task Manager. If you want to see a real task manager at work, you really need to see the Windows 10 Task Manager. Now I'm on a new, more powerful system this time, same monitor and keyboard, but this time I've got something that's got a little more oomph to it so we can really put Task Manager to task. Good humor, Mike. Okay, so anyway, all the same shortcuts we saw in the previous episode work, but I want to add one more, and that is right-clicking here on the Windows key. If we come up, we can see Task Manager is right there. I got to tell you, I love right-clicking on that. It just makes things a lot faster. All right, so here we are at Task Manager. Now, first of all, it's clearly a lot different than we saw before. And yes, I'm recording the screen. So what I want to do first of all is let me fire up some applications. So let me fire up Chrome. Now, as I fire up Chrome, you can see that that appears. Now, what's different this time, notice that it's got, wait, there's 7. I've only opened one Chrome. Yeah, well, Chrome phones home and does lots of its own little connections, tracking all kinds of stuff. I always laugh when people complain about Windows 10 telemetry. Just light up Chrome and you'll be giving away all kinds of secrets. Anyway, what you're seeing there are all the different connections, all the different Chrome instances that are taking place, even though you've just got the one web browser open at any given moment. If I opened up another tab, you'll see more will pop up, not many more because my website doesn't do a lot of sneaky stuff in the background, but you will see they open up. Now if you take a look, first of all, you're going to see the total CPU usage in straight percentage. I find that so convenient. Just give me a number and let me know what's happening. How much of my memory is being used? How much of my disk is being used? How much of my network? These are overall, and then I can pick on individuals. This is great when your computer's running slow. You can just fire up Task Manager and go, okay, which one of these applications is eating up my CPU time? And then right-click on it and turn it off. It's that easy. I love this thing. The next one as we go down is the background processes. It's just services, okay? They use the word background processes. So if we take a look at these background processes, like for example, I've got Dropbox, which I use like crazy. Now, if I right-click on this, it's going to have a bunch of information that's interesting to me, but one of the things I love is open file location. If I've got something running and I don't know where it's stored on the hard drive, that can be incredibly useful. And then I can even go on properties. If there's any particular information, how big is it, any security with it, anything like that, I can grab it right from here. Now, if you're old school and you still like services, the services tab is still there. The problem is a lot of times it's hard to say what is this particular service and which one of these processes is it linking to, but it's still there if you want it. Next, it's performance, and performance really has a much cleaner interface than we saw with Windows 7. We've got nice little tabs here that are showing the different features. If I want to see how much memory is available, it just tells me in a plain, simple number. I've got 28.6 gigabytes of about 32 gigabytes, so that's great. What my disk utilization is, how hard is my network running. It does a very, very good job. If you want Resource Monitor, it's still there if you need it. And there is a couple reasons to turn to Resource Monitor still. For example, here I am on the CPU tab. Notice that it doesn't just give me a CPU total, which is convenient, but it actually shows each core running. On this particular system, I've only got 4 cores. Isn't it funny to say only 4 in today's day and age? I've only got 4 cores. My Ryzen's got 32, but who's counting? Anyway, this could be a really handy tool. So what I want to do is I'm going to bring it up just like this, and I'm going to start my evil heavy load program. It's going to make a little mess on the screen. I'll minimize that. Now watch what's happening here. So this is where Task Manager really starts to show its worth. See how my memory's being eaten up, my CPU's being pegged, my disk usage is spiking, my network usage is over the top. Even Resource Monitor is pretty handy here. As you can see, my different CPU processes, my memory, my disk usage to some extent are really showing that they're being punished by this particular program. On today's Windows systems, if you need answers to questions like, why is my computer running so slow? Why, when I run this particular program, does my network slog down? Why is my hard drive taking so long to load a particular file? The place you're going to turn to is Task Manager. Now, Resource Monitor can still be your buddy, but in a Windows 10 world, unless you're asking for very granular information, 99 times out of 100, I'm just sticking with Task Manager because it answers the questions I need. There are so many important tools when it comes to gathering information about your system and some basic configuration that, while we've covered a lot and are going to cover more, I wanted to kind of consolidate a few that are somewhat related into this one group that I'm going to call information and configuration. So the big one I want to start off with is something called MS-Info 32. MS-Info 32, better known as System Information, is a very old information tool. It gives you an incredibly broad cross-section of information about your computer. Anything from your BIOS version to what kind of processor you're running to how much RAM you've got, it's all pretty much listed in here. Now, the system summary is pretty convenient. The other ones are much more rarely used anymore. These are some of the internal functions that maybe 25 years ago we worried about things like IRQs, but we don't really worry about them so much anymore today. We also have some of the listing of components, so if you just need a quick rundown and you don't want to go to Device Manager, it'll do a pretty good job of walking through all your different components and give you some good idea in terms of the detail. And in terms of the software environment, it'll give you some rough idea of what's going on things like your network, services, startup programs. All of these can be listed within software environment alone. I use MS-Info 32 fairly rarely, to be honest with you. Other tools do a pretty good job. The one time I will recommend using MS-Info 32 is when you just need a quick snapshot of, I'm not sure where else to look, I'm just going to go there to get the kind of information I need. Now, the next utility we're going to talk about is actually listed twice by CompTIA with different names, but it's the exact same thing. It's called msconfig, otherwise known as system configuration. Watch this. So I'm going to type in msconfig, and luckily for me, Windows is smart enough to know that it means system configuration. If this looks familiar to you, it is, because we've already mentioned this in other episodes. But let's do a quick run through and make sure you're comfortable with msconfig system configuration. It's our startup buddy. So here's our startup selection. You can just do a normal startup that's going to load all your device drivers and services. You can do a diagnostic, which is going to load just barely enough to get the system up and running. This is often really handy if you've got a bad service or a bad device driver and you don't know which one it is. You can do a selective startup, and in that case, it's either going to just load your system services or just load your startup items. A lot of times you're in a situation you're like, man, I've installed something and it's a service and something else. I'm not sure, is the services causing trouble or is the startup items causing trouble? This thing is an absolute lifesaver in being able to go, okay, there's something in my startup programs or it's something in a starting service. Okay, boot information, we've covered that pretty well, but there's a few in the bottom I want to make mention of. Number one is a safe boot. With a safe boot, it's basically shutting down all of the really complex device drivers, but it's shutting down other stuff too. Like for example, it turns off your virtual memory. It's going to turn off any super high-end video, things like that. So the minimal is pretty much the only one you want to run. The other one right here is the network, and that is the same as minimal, but it's also letting you at least get on the network so you can open up a web browser, get some device driver down or something like that. Now on the exam, it actually mentions Active Directory repair, so they're talking about this. In other episodes, we're going to be discussing Active Directory in detail. Sometimes a system will join this thing called an Active Directory, which is a special server, and it's running into trouble. Active Directory repair will actually reestablish, assuming you've got a good username and login, will reestablish the connection to that server for you. Next is services, but we've seen that before. We can turn off and on services individually. Startup, which is still in Task Manager. Here's all the programs that are starting up. We can turn those on and off individually. And then once again, tools, the place where you can go yet to other places to get stuff done. So I'm not a big fan of tools simply because I know other places to get to all these different types of tools. Okay. The next one I want to do is deep in the control panel. So let's open up a control panel. And this time I want us to find System. System is an incredibly important place for information and configuration all in one screen. You want to know what version of Windows you're running? It's right here. Do you want to know what kind of processor and RAM and system type you got? Are you running 32-bit or 64-bit Windows? It's all here. If you want to change your computer name, this is the place to do it. If you want to change, like right now, I'm connected to a domain called Total Home, but if I wanted to switch this to a work group called My House, this is the place I would do that. Also, if you haven't put in a product key, this is the place to do it. And I've already got one in, but if I wanted to change it, not sure I'd ever really wanted to do that, but if I wanted to change it, I could. The other big ones are right up here in the upper left-hand corner. Number one is System Protection. So, well, hang on a minute. Let me close this. Okay, get this in your head. You got it? So I'm going to close this. Now watch this. I'm going to go to Advanced System Settings. Mike, that looks like the same dialog box. Well, that's because it is. These two settings I'm about to show you go to the exact same dialog box, but on two different tabs. All right, let's get back to work here. System Protection is where we deal with restore points. If I want to create a restore point, if I want to give more disk space so I can save more restore points, if I want to pick which drives I'm setting up restore points for, this is all handled within this dialog box. The other one is Advanced System Settings, and this one's kind of weird, but it's important. Number one, and we've already actually come into this when we talked about virtual memory. So if you go to an earlier episode, we went to this to get to our virtual memory settings. The big one I want to talk about in here more than anything else is data execution prevention. Now, if you remember, every time a process needs some memory, it's assigned a page of memory, which is a little chunk of memory. Now, the idea behind running lots of programs is that unless they specifically need to, you don't let one program stomp on the other program. However, they discovered a bug years ago that allowed people to do it. It was an exploit that would crash a system. Today we have DEP. It comes with Windows. All processors have this capability, but you got to turn it on within the operating system, and this is the place to do it. Now, if you take a look at the screen, it says, turn it on for all the essential Windows programs and services only, or turn on DEP for all programs and services except those I select. There have only been a few situations in the years that I've worked on this where I've had to go, one particular program needs to turn off DEP. It's going to be some in-house program that somebody in-house is writing, and they're going to say, I keep having a problem. It's because they didn't write their code pretty, is really what it boils down to. By default, you leave DEP exactly as it's set, and you don't mess with it. We've got a lot of different types of utilities here, don't we? And we're always messing with this stuff. So what I want to show you is the ability for us to make our own customized utilities, all right? And to do that, we use something called MMC. So you just type in MMC, and you get the Microsoft Management Console. Now, the Microsoft Management Console by default is pretty boring. However, it's really a powerful tool, and for somebody like me who likes to have his own customized groups of utilities, it's absolutely amazing. So let me show you how this works. So what we're going to do is we're going to add or remove a snap-in. This is where it all starts. And what you have here is a list of a whole bunch of tools. Now, some of these might look familiar to you. For example, here's computer management, here's device manager, here's disk management. So what I want to do is I want to make a utility that pulls up disk management and device manager, because I'm a hardware nerd and I use those a lot. Yeah, I mean, I could go in and just click on them every time, but I don't want to. So one of the things that's pretty cool here is you can say, do you want to do this for this computer, or could you do it for another computer on the network? And if you have logon capabilities for another computer on the network, you can run somebody else's device manager. This can be incredibly helpful when somebody just installed a new piece of hardware and they're having trouble and you don't want to get out of your chair. Right here, man, it works amazingly well. So I'm going to just do it for this one, and I'm going to get device manager. I'm going to add that. So you'll see that I have added 2 snap-ins. So what I want to do now is just hit OK. And you can see now that I've got disk management running and device manager. Well, now this is cool, but how do I save this? How do I keep it? It's really pretty trivial. Just hit File, Save As. And I'm going to put this right on my desktop because, you know, I like things on my desktop. And I'm going to call it Timmy. And it gets that MSC extension. I'm going to hit Save. Let me close this. And you'll see I now have Timmy right up here. If I have certain tools that I want a lot, I just want to be on my desktop and I want to deal with stuff, MMC is a wonderful tool that allows you to create your own customized information and configuration utilities. The 2 most popular people at any dinner party are going to be the doctors and the computer nerds. Because if you're either one of those people, folks are going to come up to you and go, oh, you know, oh, doctor, I have this pain right here. Or if you're a computer nerd, someone's going to come up and go, oh, you know, I've got this problem with my hard drive. So we always get a line of people, so we're so popular. It's great. One of the big things I hear is, how do I speed up my computer? And the answer is, well, do you actually know your computer is running slow? A lot of times people miss that perception. So what we do when you first install and set up a computer, we go through what's known as performance baselining. The performance baseline just kind of gives you an idea of how well does your computer run before you add all those Steam account games and all the big heavy applications and everything that slogs the computer down. So the tool we use to do this is called Performance Monitor. Let me show you how he works. Performance Monitor is a very old tool, but particularly with Windows 10, it works beautifully. Now, before we get into Performance Monitor, there's two things you need to understand. Number one, we have to decide how we're going to run this. There's a real-time mode where you can just look and you'll get a graph. In fact, it starts by default. You can see it already running. And then we can actually store information and we can run it over 24 hours or over the weekend or something like that. And it allows us to get an idea that over time, what's happening with the computer. So I want to start off with just running it real time. So take a look at the screen here, and you're going to see that by default, it has what we call a counter already installed, which is percentage of processor time. And this is being traced over time, so you can tell how early in the morning Mike Myers shoots videos right there. But what I want to do is make sure you understand there are thousands of built-in counters that check so much of your system, it's absolutely unreal. Anything going on with your hard drive, anything going on with your network, anything going on with your CPU, anything going on with RAM, software, all kinds of stuff. And what I want us to do right now is we're going to start adding some counters to this real-time graph. So to add counters, you just click on this green cross. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that if you have access to other computers on the network, you can actually do this to other computers, but we're going to stay with the local computer right now. So, for example, what I want is already under processor, this is just a heading, and underneath this are all kinds of important counters. So processor time is, in fact, it's already loaded. I'm not going to load it again, but if I wanted to put processor time on that list, I could do it right there. I could do it as a percent of user time. Now, when I say user time is individual users, how heavy are they using something, I could do that here. And there's a number of these that I don't even know what they are, and that's okay. Another really important set of counters is under logical disks. And this is actually, when they say logical disks, they're talking about individual volumes. So I can come in and I can say, is somebody reading on a particular disk really, really hard? So here I can pick individual volumes I'm interested in. So I'm going to say, I'm worried that my C drive is getting written on really hard, so I'm going to add this particular counter. And you can even do stuff like with memory. So how many available, well, I don't know, let's do megabytes. So what I've done is I've added two different counters, and if I hit OK, you can see that these counters are going to begin to show up. Now, one of the things, I never like these colors. Let's change a color here. Let's turn that blue. So I'm not doing a lot of exciting activity here, so let's get heavy load running one more time. Start that. Let me minimize all this. In fact, let's just bring this forward. So now you can see that I've put some actual load on it. You can see that my computer is starting to log all of this type of information. The A+ exam is not going to ask you what counters do what. That's not going to happen. What they are going to expect you to know is that if you want to create a baseline, you will use Performance Monitor and you will select certain counters. In fact, most of us don't even select counters unless we have a very specific issue like, okay, for some reason when I walk away over the weekend, I come back and my computer's locked up. So I'm going to put CPU load and memory usage up, and I'm just going to leave it running, and then I want to be able to come back and see what it looked like when I come back on Monday. The problem is if we do that, we're not going to be able to use a real-time tool like this. We're going to have to store it in a log file, and Performance Monitor does a great job with this. If you want to track stuff over time, you need to use data collector sets. A data collector set is nothing more than a pile of individual counters that you put together for your own needs. So let's go ahead and make a user-defined collector set. So I'm going to say new data collector set, and I'm going to call it Timmy. Now I can create it from a template, which they recommend, or I can create it manually, and I just want to put one little counter in here, so I'm going to do it manually. Now the next thing it's going to say is, do you really want me to make logs? Yes, that's why I'm here. So I want you to make a log of whatever performance counters I choose. Event trace data is another aspect outside of this where I could actually say if a certain thing takes place, like if I hit 80% of CPU usage, just that. And system configuration information is often used just because I want to keep track what was the system setup when I did this particular one. So we're going to go ahead and just leave it like it is. Let's hit next. Now here's where I add my performance counters. So in this particular case, I'm going to add processor again. Now what's interesting here, do you see where it says processor and I hit total right here? And you'll see there's an asterisk. What's basically saying is every single one of these counters that are listed underneath him will be, let's get to the right spot. So all of these counters, you'll see that asterisk, that means take them all. Some people like that. I just find that it makes a lot of mess. So let me remove that and let's just pick a particular one. So we're just going to pick processor time and we're going to hit add. I've got what I want. Let's go ahead and hit next. Oh, you can actually change the interval. You want it to check more often? Let's say every 5 seconds. It's going to make a bigger log file, but it'll give me more information. And then I say, where do I want it to be saved? By default, it's going to be c:\windows/perflogs /admin/Timmy. I'm going to be fun. Let's just throw it on my desktop. We hit next. And here I can say, who do I want it to run as? For example, I'm a local administrator, but if I wanted to change that, I could log in as somebody else. Generally, I like to leave it as this. And I'm just going to save and close. Ta-da! I've now made Timmy. So if we want to run Timmy, just right-click on it and start it. What's happening now is every 5 seconds, he's logging the processor time. That's it. And he's going to keep doing this for as long as I want. Now, there's a couple of things with logs. And number one, we usually use what are called cyclic logs. And basically that means if my log file gets bigger than 10 megabytes or whatever, just start writing over the old stuff. It is hilarious, but it can happen. I've seen it happen more than once. I've done it too, where you start making log files like this and you completely fill your C drive because you didn't think to turn it off and it made a lot of data. So that's why we have these limits where in terms of size, and we can also make them cyclic. So I'm going to go ahead and let him run, and let's stop him. Okay, so Timmy is now stopped. Well, that's great, but I want to see it. Can I see what I did? Easy. If you make a data collector set, it will then automatically generate a report. Ta-da! So we can actually now see the results of our performance baseline. Not too exciting, but it worked out well. Now, the other problem people run into, they're like, well, Mike, I don't know what kind of counters to use. First of all, there's acres of documentation on this, but if you just want to go in cold, all you need to do is come over to data collector sets, and you'll see system here. It has preset diagnostics where you're trying to check problems, and then system performance. The system performance covers a lot of counters. Look at all these asterisks. Yipe. This is going to make a pretty big file, but it's checking the CPU, it's checking the actual physical hard drive, checking the memory, overview of system, anything that's serving, your network cards, your internet stuff. So it does a pretty good job by itself. Notice the sample interval is every 1 second. This is going to make a big file if I let it run, but you know what? I'm a glutton for punishment. And by default, you can see where he's loading all of these files. This is going to make an extremely large performance baseline. Personally, I find these a little onerous because they're so big, but just to give you a sense of what they look like, we'll go ahead and turn that off. And we come down to system. I did system performance. There he is. And you actually get a result. Now, there are tables in there, but we had so many counters in there that it had to actually separate them into something that looks a lot like Performance Monitor. The bottom line is that if you need long-term information about how your system's running, the Performance Monitor is the best tool you've ever seen. He will do an amazing job. The biggest trick to Performance Monitor more than anything else is getting used to counters. There are tens of thousands of websites out there where Windows nerds get together and they say, what are the best counters to determine if I'm having a slow internet connection? Or what are the best counters if I install Adobe that I need to be watching? Take your time, do a little research, but remember, it all starts in Performance Monitor. So there I was, working on my computer, just minding my own business, and suddenly it went poof! What do I do about it, Mike? Would it be nice if there was something inside your computer that says, well, you typed in a wrong command, or a certain program tried to start, or your hard drive decided to blow up, or your video card's RAM started to corrupt? Well, there is. And that tool is called Event Viewer, probably one of the most underutilized whodunit Sherlock Holmes parts of your computer, and it surprises me how few even good techs take advantage of such a simple tool that answers such basic questions. The trick to Event Viewer is you've got to get it set up the right way. Let me first show you Event Viewer and in its default format, and then we're going to talk about things we can do to make it even better. So let's fire up Event Viewer. This is Event Viewer. The most interesting part is here in the center, but what I want to take a look at is right here. This is the most important part. These are all of the logs that Windows keeps by default. Now these aren't performance, these are events that take place that can be good or bad. They are broken up into 4 main groups. The forwarded events is not interesting to me, I'm going to skip it. Number 1 is applications. This is anything that's happening within an application itself that might be of interest. Now you'll notice that there's a little I for information. That's simply saying that something happened that's not necessarily bad, he's just giving you some information. Second is security. With security, you're talking about things, for example, here's somebody trying to do a logon, and well, there are lots of logons in here. In fact, this is probably one of the most common things you'll see is log on, log off, that type of information. Next is setup. Setup has to do not only with the initial setup of Windows, which could be very helpful, but also in terms of any updates that took place, anything like that. Last one is system. This tends to be the place we go to when things blow up. In this case, we're talking about anything that has to do with the Windows core system itself. Now what's interesting, we actually have some serious errors here, which show by the red. There's also a yellow for the record, and there's even a green, which means, we're just giving you this information, don't know whether you need it or not. Now the trick is trying to read this stuff. It can often be a real pain. So if you see something, this is red, it looks scary. So I'm going to double click on it, and it's going to give me some kind of information. Boy, this is a classic right here. The machine-to-all tradition studies do not grant local activation permission for the guys. What the heck is that? I don't know, but it's red and it's scary. So what can you do? Well, first, let's take a look at the screen. Ah, look at this. Event log online help. So we click on that, and he's going to send some information up to Microsoft, and we hit yes. Oh, give us a great answer, Microsoft, and it takes us to the default web page. Microsoft's a little bit notorious about not keeping up with all these different types of errors. So really what you end up doing in these situations is you cut a piece of it out, you throw it into your web search, and something shows up to give you a clue. So I'm not expecting you to know every single little event that could go on, given the fact there's probably 10 million of them. What's important to me is that you can see something's wrong, you can diagnose it simply by cutting and pasting, going to a website, and figuring it out. So a big long error like that might end up being, I have an old version of some program and I need to update it. Really, it's that simple. So these are the 4 big ones. Now, what you're seeing on these screens is what is set up by default with Windows, but you can add more by editing what's known as an audit policy. To get to your audit policy, we have to fire up a different program called Local Security Policy. So here's Local Security Policy. Now, if we take a look at this, it doesn't say a whole lot, so let me give you a quick rundown. Local security policy is actually two very different programs in one. Number one, it sets up the policy for your system. For example, you want to say, look, nobody can use simple passwords. We have to require complex passwords. You do it here. Or you can say, look, if you log in 3 times incorrectly, we're going to lock you out and well, we can't close your account, but we can disable your account. So there's a lot of security stuff that's in here. That's one thing. Cover that in other episodes. What I want to cover here is that this is where we do audit policy. Here's where we say, look, there are certain events that are not on by default that I want Event Viewer to watch, and I'm going to show you a classic right here. I want to know who's logging onto my computer. So we go into our local policies, and you'll see audit policy right here. So by default, audit account logon events is not audited. We're about to change that right now. Here I can say I want to see every time someone's successful, and if I want to, I can say every time somebody fails. And now I can track that particular issue. What if somebody's messing with my accounts? They're adding users or something like that. That's account management. If somebody tries to add a user and they're successful, I want to see it. Or if they're trying to change permissions for a user and they fail, I want to see it. By adding these features, I'm going to have some people logging in and logging off successfully and unsuccessfully, but over time what I'm going to get is a nice listing of everybody, including the name they typed in, who are trying to get into my computer. It's a great tool to allow you to know who's doing what on your system. The trick is, in order to make Event Viewer work properly for this one particular situation, you've got to go into your local security policy. You have to set up an audit policy that says, watch out for the log on and log off. The bottom line is that this is an amazing tool. The trick with Event Viewer, more than anything else, is number one, make sure you know the different subgroups, application, security, system, and setup. And number two, understand that a lot of times you're going to have to go into your local security policy to turn on an audit simply because you want it to show up in Event Viewer. Look, I'm a systems guy. My job is to make computers run really, really well. My job is also as a network guy is to make sure that they have good interconnectivity, and when you want to see Google, it'll be there for you. But the bane of my existence are these people called programmers. Programmers are evil, terrible people, and they sleep in basements and they eat junk food, and well, they actually make me a lot of money because without programmers, I as a systems guy will have nothing to do. Any organization is going to have applications written by programmers that do important work. And in a lot of situations, you can have tens, hundreds, thousands of people who all have to access, for example, a single database. And this one database has to be accessed by different applications in different types of places. And it can get very, very confusing if every time you go into an application, you have to go, okay, where is that database? Search it by network name or something like that. What we can do instead is use something called Open Database Connectivity, or ODBC. ODBC is based mainly on a type of computer communication called Structured Query Language, or SQL. SQL allows just about any application to talk to just about any database. But one of the tricks is that application has to have some way to link to that database, and that's where ODBC comes into play. Let me give you an example of how this works. Here are all the computers used by salespeople by my company. In this computer right here is a database that keeps track of inventory and prices and all kinds of stuff that salespeople need to be able to look at in real time to be sure that they're giving, well, do we have it in stock and do we have it at a price that's acceptable? The problem is the only thing that's on these individual computers is a front end where they type in the inventory number and then it queries this database to figure out what's in there. These 4 computers are local into the office. This computer over here is a salesperson in Denver. Doesn't matter. We have to come up with a way that all of these computers can access this one particular database. ODBC creates a standard linkage format that allows us to do exactly that. Let me show you how ODBC works. Here's ODBC on a Windows system. This comes on every Windows computer. Now there's all of these different types of links. We're going to do what's called a system DSN. Now I'm not going to march through every one of these screens, but we'll get the main ones. So number 1, we're going to say, what do we want as a data source? And by default, the only option you have is a SQL server. That's that big server out there. Now we want to give this name a data source name. You don't type anything in here. You are given this information by the people who wrote the program, and of course they called it Timmy. The description doesn't matter. And then we have to actually connect to a particular SQL server. You'll be given some type of addressing to get there. This is not information you create. The people who make the database have to come up with this. So this next screen defines how we log into it. I'm just going to kind of skip over that for right now. Then if there's anything special that we need to place in, and again, it's the programmers who tell us how to do all this, we can set all this information in as well. And more programmer stuff. And then we hit finish, and that's all the information we need. The nice part about ODBC is most of the time, this is automatically updated when you install the front end. Part of the install program will actually set all this up for you. As computer nerds, about the only time I have to go in here is because there's a problem, or because more than anything else, they're developing the program on the fly. And they're like, oh, Mike, change the server name from dbase32 to dbase33. Other than that, this is usually handled again through the installation, and there's really not much for us to do. Now, ODBC is absolutely fantastic, but there are situations where we get into a much more complicated scenario. What I'm talking about in this case is what's known as the COM model. Now the COM, or really COM Plus model, is developed by Windows, and it's exclusively for Windows, although they try to get other people to do it. It's pretty much a Windows thing that allows us to share a lot more than databases. For example, we can have certain bits of file that can be stored on one server and passed around to everybody. So if I'm developing a particular program, I don't have to write every little single piece of it, but I go to all these other connections, including databases if you want, and put all that together. In order to deal with that, we have to use what's known as component services. Now trust me, the only time you're ever going to go in here is because some programmer said, please go into component services and type something. So let's at least get in there and take a look. Here's component services. Now you'll notice that component services also has event viewer and services. They're not part of component services. This is just good old event viewer and services. A lot of times when people are messing with this stuff, they need to watch events and they need to see what services are running. That's why that's there. So traditionally when we come in here, so we're going to go to computers, my computer, and there are all of these different settings. I want to give one example. So we have an application that's taking advantage of this. So what I'm going to do is right click on here and I'm going to create a new application. So in this case, I'm just going to make an empty one, and I'm going to call it Timmy. So this could be a library application that's just a bunch of particular files that my local application needs, or it could be a server application where it's looking for a particular server to do stuff. We'll do a server. So it's going to say, how do I log into this particular one? I'm going to leave it as interactive, which means he will log in every time he fires up the application. And then I can actually set up different types of roles, which defines, for example, which people can delete the database, or which other people can reset certain fields on the dialog boxes for the application. And I'm just going to leave that alone, and I'm done. You will never, ever, ever go into component services without a programmer or an application developer on the phone with you. However, what is important is that you need to have some comfort with the interface, and most importantly for the exam more than anything else, the only time you're ever going to deal with this one or ODBC is because probably some programmers asked you to.